Sometimes the loneliest souls understand each other best. Sometimes it takes 20 years of silence before you're ready to be heard again. Tansy Braddock was 62 when she came down from Broken Tooth Ridge that autumn morning. For 2 decades, she'd lived alone up there, and the valley folks had stopped asking why. They just called her the Mountain Woman. But when she arrived for supplies, the whole town was gathered at the corral, watching a wild donkey named Smoke Ears destroy another fence. Every rancher had tried to tame him. Every one had failed. Calder Brinks was nursing bruised ribs and wounded pride. Then Tansy walked into that dusty ring and did something nobody expected. What happened next would change everything. What could one quiet woman do that a dozen tough ranchers could not? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story resonates with you, subscribe, because tomorrow brings something special. The worn leather pack on Tansy. Braddock's shoulders had seen better days, much like the woman carrying it. The straps were cracked and mended with fishing line, the canvas patched with squares of deerskin she'd cured herself. It held everything she needed for her quarterly trip down the mountain. A list written in careful pencil on the back of an old envelope, a few bills folded into her shirt pocket, and the quiet determination that had kept her alive for 20 years on Broken Tooth Ridge. She'd left her cabin before dawn, as always. The walk down took 4 hours if you knew the trails, longer if you didn't. Tansy knew every stone, every route, every place where the path narrowed to nothing, and you had to trust your feet to find the way. She carried a walking stick carved from mountain ash, its surface smooth from years of use. 20 notches marked the wood, one for each year she'd lived alone up there. She'd carved the first one with shaking hands, still raw from leaving. The most recent one she'd added just last month, the knife moving steady and sure. The ridge itself was a hard place, all shale and shadow, where the wind came down cold even in summer. Her cabin sat in a small clearing she'd chosen for its isolation, tucked so far back into the folds of the mountain that even hunters rarely passed by. She'd built a life there from almost nothing, a garden that struggled against the rocky soil, a creek that ran clear and cold, a woodpile that never seemed quite tall enough for winter. It was a life of deliberate simplicity, stripped down to what mattered: survival, solitude, and the absence of questions she didn't want to answer. The valley below was another world entirely. Tansy could see it spread out as she descended, the patchwork of ranches and fields, the thin ribbon of road that connected everything to everything else. The town itself, barely big enough to deserve the name, clustered around a single main street, a general store, a feed shop, a diner that doubled as the post office, and the First Baptist Church that nobody seemed to attend except for weddings and funerals. She'd lived here once, a lifetime ago. Not in the valley proper, but close enough that people remembered her face, if not quite her name. That was before she became the Mountain Woman, before the leaving, before the thing that made leaving necessary. They'd called her something else then, but that woman was gone. Whoever Tansy Braddock had been at 42, she wasn't that person anymore. The general store was her first stop, always. Harold Pitts ran it, had run it for 30 years, and he'd learned not to make small talk with Tansy beyond what was strictly necessary. She appreciated that about him. She'd hand him her list, he'd gather the items, she'd pay cash, and that was that. No weather commentary, no questions about how she was managing up there alone, no pitying looks, just business. But today, as she rounded the last bend before town, she noticed something different. The usual quiet of mid-morning was broken by voices, lots of them all coming from the direction of the town corral. Tansy paused, one hand on her walking stick, listening. Men's voices, mostly, raised in that particular tone that meant either excitement or trouble. Probably both. She should have gone straight to the store. Should have kept her head down, done her business, and headed back up the mountain before anyone noticed she was there. That was the agreement, unspoken but understood. She didn't bother them, they didn't bother her. But curiosity was a hard thing to ignore, especially when you'd spent 20 years with no company but your own thoughts. The corral sat at the edge of town, a sprawling enclosure of weathered pine rails that had seen better days. As Tansy approached, she could see at least 24 people gathered around it, more people than she'd seen in one place in years. They were all watching something inside the corral, their attention fixed with the intensity of spectators at a prize fight. She worked her way to the edge of the crowd, staying back where she wouldn't be noticed. It wasn't hard. People saw what they expected to see, and nobody expected the mountain woman to suddenly appear at a town gathering. Inside the corral, a man was picking himself up off the ground, dust coating his jeans and the back of his shirt. Tansy recognized him, even from a distance. Calder Brinks, the valley's most prominent rancher, a man who'd built his reputation on stubbornness and a refusal to admit defeat. He was in his late 60s now, silver-haired and still strong, but moving with the careful stiffness of someone who'd just taken a hard fall. And standing at the far end of the corral, sides heaving, ears pinned flat against his skull, was the reason for the fall. A donkey the color of smoke and shadow, compact and muscular, with eyes that held nothing but fury and fear. "Smoke ears," someone near Tansy muttered. "Damn animal's gonna kill someone, eventually." The woman next to him nodded. 3 years of this. Nobody can do a thing with him. Calder's the 5th man to try this month. Tansy watched as Calder limped toward the fence, one hand pressed to his ribs. His face was tight with pain, and something else, embarrassment, maybe, or rage at his own failure. Other men rushed to help him through the rails, their voices a mixture of concern and barely concealed relief that it hadn't been them in there. "We should put him down," someone said. "Animal like that's got no use to anyone." "Waste of a good donkey," another voice countered. "Just needs the right hand. We've tried every hand in the valley. Things broke wrong, that's all." "Some animals just are." Tansy's gaze drifted back to the donkey. Smoke Ears hadn't moved from his corner, but his entire body was still coiled tight, ready to explode into violence at the slightest provocation. She'd seen that stance before, that particular combination of defiance and terror. It was the posture of something that had been hurt so many times it couldn't remember what safety felt like. Without quite meaning to, she found herself studying the animal's movements, the way he shifted his weight, the flicker of his ears tracking every sound. There was intelligence there. She could see it. And something else, a kind of desperate exhaustion that came from fighting the same battle over and over with no hope of winning. A memory rose unbidden, her own hands on a horse's neck years ago, feeling the tremor of fear beneath warm hide. A voice, her voice, younger and steadier, saying, "It's all right. Nobody's going to hurt you. I promise." She pushed the memory down, but it left an ache behind. Calder was on his feet now, surrounded by well-wishers and advice-givers. His jaw was set in that way men's jaws got when they were determined not to show weakness. "I'll try again tomorrow," he was saying. "Just need a different approach." "You need a miracle," someone muttered, not quite quietly enough. Tansy shifted her pack on her shoulders, preparing to leave. This wasn't her business. The town's problems weren't her problems, hadn't been for 20 years. She had supplies to buy and a long walk ahead of her. Whatever happened to one stubborn donkey in one small valley, it had nothing to do with her. But as she turned to go, Smoke Ears shifted in his corner, and for just a moment their eyes met across the dusty expanse of the corral. In that brief connection, Tansy saw something that stopped her cold: recognition, not of her specifically, but of kind, recognizing kind. Two creatures who'd chosen isolation over trust, wildness over vulnerability, because the alternative had proven too painful to bear. She stood there, frozen between leaving and staying, while the crowd around her debated the donkey's fate and Calder's bruised pride. Her hand found the walking stick's worn surface, traced one of the 20 notches without looking. 20. 2 years. 20 years of running from connection, from questions, from the risk of being known. And here was this animal, 3 years into his own private war, fighting the same battle she'd been fighting all along. "It's not your problem," she told herself quietly. But her feet didn't move toward the general store. Instead, against every instinct that had kept her safe and separate for 2 decades, Tansy Braddock found herself stepping closer to the corral fence, her eyes never leaving the smoke-colored donkey, who was as trapped by his fear as she'd ever been by hers. The torn halter hung from a fence post, like a battle flag, its rope fibers frayed and split, where Smoke Ears had snapped it during one of his escapes. Tansy counted 3 others scattered around the corral, each one marking another failed attempt to control him. The accumulation of broken equipment told a story all by itself, a story of force, meeting force, with nothing to show for it but damage on both sides. She watched as Calder refused help from 2 younger men, waving them off with a grimace. His pride was wounded worse than his ribs. Anyone could see that. He'd built his reputation on being able to handle any animal, break any horse, manage any situation through sheer force of will. But will alone wasn't working on Smoke Ears, and that failure sat on Calder like a weight. Should have shot him when he first showed up. A leathery old rancher said to his companion. Came out of nowhere 3 years back, half-starved and mean. We all thought kindness would settle him. We were wrong. 3 years. Tansy did the math automatically. That meant Smoke Ears would have appeared around the same time she'd carved the 17th notch on her walking stick. 17 years alone by then, and she'd thought she'd forgotten how to care about anything beyond her own survival. Apparently, she'd been wrong about that too. The crowd was thinning now, the show over for the day. Calder had retreated to his truck, sitting in the driver's seat, with the door open, breathing carefully. His wife had passed some years back. Tansy had heard that much, even up on the ridge. Since then, he'd thrown himself into the ranch work with the intensity of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. She understood that impulse better than she wanted to. Smoke Ears hadn't relaxed. If anything, he looked more agitated now that most people had left. His head was up, ears swiveling, tracking every movement and sound. When a piece of paper blew across the corral, he shied violently, crashing into the fence hard enough to make the rails shake. "He's going to hurt himself," Tansy said, not quite meaning to say it aloud. The woman standing next to her turned, surprised. She was younger, maybe mid-30s, with work-worn hands and tired eyes. "He hurts himself regular," she said. "Got scars all over from fence wire and his own panic. Doc Freely says it's only a matter of time before he breaks a leg or worse. And then they'll put him down." "Then they'll put him down," the woman agreed. "Shame, really. Beautiful animal under all that fear." Tansy nodded slowly. "Beautiful and broken, like everything else that survived by fighting." The woman studied Tansy with open curiosity. "You're the mountain woman, aren't you, Tansy Braddock? I'm Lily Brinks. I'm married to Calder's son, Ben." She said it like a confession, like it was something she wasn't quite proud of. "I know who you are." It wasn't unfriendly, just factual. Tansy had seen Lily around on her previous supply runs, had noted the way the younger woman always seemed to be looking for an exit from whatever conversation she was trapped in. "You worked with horses once, didn't you? Before you went up the mountain?" "My mother-in-law used to talk about it before she passed. Said you had a gift with difficult animals." The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through memories. Tansy had worked hard to keep submerged. Yes, she'd worked with horses. She'd trained them, gentled them, built a small reputation for being able to reach the ones everyone else had given up on. That was the before time, when she'd been someone else entirely. "That was a long time ago," Tansy said quietly, "but you still remember how." "Remembering isn't the same as doing." Lily glanced toward the corral, where Smoke Ears still stood rigid with tension. "Maybe not. But nobody else here remembers anything except force. And force hasn't worked." Before Tansy could respond, Calder's voice cut across the space between them. Lily, I thought Ben was expecting you home. There was no warmth in it, just authority. Lily's shoulders tensed immediately, and she gave Tansy an apologetic look before heading toward her father-in-law. Tansy watched the exchange, the older man's barely concealed irritation, the younger woman's careful deference, and saw another kind of captivity, just as real as the corral's wooden rails. She should leave. Should walk away right now, go to the general store, get her supplies, and disappear back up the mountain where she belonged. The donkey wasn't her responsibility. The town's problems weren't her problems. She'd spent 20 years learning how to not care about things, and she'd gotten good at it. But her feet carried her closer to the corral fence instead of away from it. Her hands found the rough wood of the top rail, and she stood there, just watching. Smoke Ears watched her back, his whole body a question mark of suspicion. "You thinking about trying something?" She turned to find Calder standing a few feet away, one arm wrapped around his ribs. Up close, she could see the pain lines around his eyes, the frustration carved into the set of his mouth. "No," Tansy said, "just looking. He's not worth looking at. Animal's worthless. He's scared." Calder's expression hardened. "He's mean. There's a difference." "Is there?" Tansy kept her voice level, neutral. "From where I'm standing, fear and meanness look pretty similar when they've been going on long enough. You some kind of expert now?" There was an edge to the question, sharp with wounded pride. "No, just someone who knows what fear looks like." They stood in silence for a moment, both watching the donkey. Smoke Ears had moved to the far corner again, as far from the humans as the space allowed. His breathing had calmed some, but his muscles were still taut, ready to bolt or fight. "I've tried patience," Calder said finally. "Tried treats, tried gentle handling, tried everything the books say. Nothing works. He just gets more aggressive. Maybe because he doesn't trust that the patience will last. Maybe he's waiting for the moment when you give up on gentle and go back to force." Calder's jaw tightened. "You think you could do better?" It was a challenge, pure and simple. Tansy recognized it for what it was. A test, a dare, a way for Calder to regain some measure of control by proving that even the legendary mountain woman couldn't succeed where he'd failed. She should say no, should walk away from the bait, from the trap, from the entire situation. But something in Smoke Ears' stance, in the desperate wildness of his fear, called to something in her that 20 years of isolation hadn't quite managed to kill. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think the approach you're using is making him worse, not better. He's not fighting you anymore, he's fighting the expectation that you'll hurt him. And expectation is a lot harder to overcome than just stubbornness. So what would you do differently?" Tansy shifted her pack, feeling the weight of it, the weight of her own accumulated years of running. "I'd stop trying to break him. I'd stop treating him like a problem that needs solving. I'd just—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I'd just be present with him. No agenda, no timeline. Just two living things in the same space. Neither one trying to control the other." Calder snorted. "That's not training. That's just standing around. Maybe, but standing around hasn't gotten anyone hurt yet." The rancher studied her with narrowed eyes, weighing something. Finally he said, "You want to try? Be my guest. But when he puts you in the dirt like he's done to everyone else, don't expect sympathy." Tansy looked at him for a long moment, then back at Smoke Ears. Everything in her that had learned to survive alone was screaming at her to refuse, to maintain the careful distance that had protected her for so long. But there was another voice, quieter, almost forgotten, the voice of the woman she'd been before grief had driven her to the mountain. That woman had believed in the possibility of healing, had believed that even the most damaged creatures could learn to trust again if someone was patient enough, present enough, willing enough to wait. "All right," she heard herself say. "I'll try." Calder's eyebrows rose. He clearly hadn't expected her to accept. "When?" "Now. Now. You don't want to think about it?" Come back tomorrow with a plan? Tansy adjusted her pack one more time, then set it down carefully at the base of the fence. Thinking about it will just give me time to talk myself out of it, and plans don't work with animals like him. You have to feel your way through. Without giving herself time for second thoughts, she climbed over the corral fence. The worn wood was smooth under her palms, warm from the afternoon sun. She dropped down into the enclosure slowly, landing with bent knees, making herself as small and unthreatening as possible. Smokey's reaction was immediate. His head snapped up, ears pinned flat, and he backed into his corner with a force that shook the fence behind him. A low, warning bray rumbled from his chest, not quite aggressive yet, but definitely not welcoming. Tansy didn't move closer. She simply stood there, a few feet from the fence, pack still on her shoulders, walking stick in her hand. She didn't look directly at the donkey, didn't make any sudden movements. She just breathed and waited and let him see that she wasn't going to demand anything from him. Behind her, she could hear Calder settling in to watch, could feel the weight of his skepticism. A few other people had noticed her in the corral and were drifting back, curious or concerned. Let them watch. Let them think what they wanted. Right now, the only opinion that mattered was Smokey's, and he was making his position very clear. Stay away. So she stayed away. She stood in the autumn sunlight, feeling the warmth on her shoulders, listening to the small sounds of the town going about its business. And slowly, gradually, she felt something shift, not in Smokey's, not yet, but in herself. The tight coil of isolation she'd wrapped around her heart for 20 years loosened just slightly, just enough to let in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could still do this, could still reach across the gap between fear and trust, if only she was brave enough to try. The donkey watched her with dark, suspicious eyes, and Tansy Braddock, the mountain woman, watched him right back and waited. The photograph in Tansy's shirt pocket was creased from years of being folded and unfolded, the edges soft with handling. She never looked at it anymore, hadn't looked at it in probably 5 years, but she still carried it. A talisman, maybe. A reminder. A punishment. She wasn't sure which. She'd been standing in the corral for 20 minutes now, and Smokey's hadn't moved from his corner. That was fine. She hadn't expected him to. Trust wasn't built in minutes or even hours. It was built in the slow accumulation of moments where the expected harm didn't arrive, where patience proved genuine instead of tactical. The crowd behind her had grown restless and then bored, and most had drifted away. Only Calder remained, leaning against the fence with his arms crossed, watching with the intensity of a man who couldn't quite believe what he was seeing, or rather, what he wasn't seeing. No drama, no confrontation, just a woman standing still and a donkey refusing to acknowledge her. "This is your plan?" Calder called out finally. "Just stand there." Tansy didn't turn around. "Yes, that's not training. I know." A pause. "How long you planning to do this?" "As long as it takes." She heard him mutter something under his breath, but he didn't leave. That told her something about Calder Brinks. For all his bluster and wounded pride, he was curious enough to see this through, or maybe stubborn enough. With men like him, it was hard to tell the difference. Smokey's shifted his weight, and Tansy felt the movement through the ground before she saw it. His ears flickered forward for just a second, then back again. Testing. She kept her breathing steady, her posture relaxed. Nothing about her said threat. Nothing. About her said control. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows lengthened. Tansy's legs began to ache from standing still, but she didn't shift her position. This was the work, not the exciting part, not the breakthrough moment, but the slow, grinding patience that preceded all meaningful change. She'd forgotten that, up on the mountain. When your only company was yourself, you didn't need patience. You didn't need to wait for trust or connection. You just existed, day after day, in the echoing silence of your own thoughts. A memory surfaced, unbidden, her daughter's voice bright with excitement. "Mama, watch! I taught Copper to bow. Tansy's chest tightened. She pushed the memory down, but it clung like morning fog. Copper had been a chestnut mare, gentle and eager to please. Nothing like Smoke Ears. But the principle had been the same: reward the small steps, celebrate the tiny victories, never ask for more than the animal was ready to give. Her daughter had understood that, instinctively, had approached training with a joy and patience that Tansy had tried to emulate. Emma. Her daughter's name was Emma. She never said it aloud anymore, hadn't for years, but sometimes it echoed in her mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Emma, who'd loved horses and hand-drawn maps and the way frost looked on window glass. Emma, who'd been 12 years old when the school bus lost control on an icy road and Tansy forced her attention back to the present. The past was a dangerous place to wander, especially here, especially now, when she needed all her focus on the animal in front of her. Smoke Ears' head lowered slightly. Not much, barely noticeable, but Tansy caught it. His ears were still back, his body still tense, but that tiny shift in posture spoke volumes. He was starting to believe she might actually just stand there, might actually not push him, rush him, demand something from him. "I see you," she said quietly, not quite to him, not quite to herself. "I know what it's like to hurt so bad you can't imagine letting anyone close enough to hurt you again." The donkey's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, but he didn't bolt. Progress, in its own small way. Behind her, Calder shifted position, and the fence creaked. Smoke Ears tensed immediately, head snapping back up, body coiling. Tansy still didn't move. "Sorry," Calder muttered. "Forgot how spooky he is." "He's not spooky. He's vigilant. There's a difference. Looks the same from here." "It's not." Tansy kept her voice low and even. "Spooky is an overreaction to harmless things. Vigilant is a reasonable response to a world that's proven itself dangerous. He's not being irrational, he's being smart." Another long silence. Then, "You really think he can be gentled?" "I think he can learn that not everyone is a threat. Whether that's the same as gentling, I don't know." The afternoon wore on. At some point, Harold from the general store came by to see what was happening. Tansy heard him talking to Calder in low tones, heard her name mentioned. She ignored them both. Her entire world had narrowed to this corral, this animal, this fragile thread of possibility stretching between them. Smoke Ears took a step forward. Just one, tentative and uncertain, but a step nonetheless. Then another. He was still 20 feet away, still ready to bolt, but he was moving toward her instead of away from her, and that meant something. Tansy's heart rate picked up, but she forced herself to remain still. This was the crucial moment, the moment when most people would try to capitalize on the progress, would reach out or move closer or say something encouraging. But those were human impulses, human desires for resolution and advancement. Animals didn't work on human timelines. They worked on their own rhythms, their own readiness. So she stood still, and she waited, and she let Smoke Ears decide what came next. He took another step, then stopped. His nostrils flared, taking in her scent. His ears moved constantly, tracking sounds from the town, the wind, the birds overhead. Everything was a potential threat. Everything required assessment. "That's right," Tansy murmured. "You take your time. Nobody's going to rush you. Nobody's going to force you. You get to choose." The words were for him, but they resonated in her own chest with unexpected force. How long had it been since she'd truly chosen anything? 20 years ago, she'd run to the mountain in a fog of grief and guilt, and then she'd simply stayed. Not because she'd actively chosen isolation day after day, but because inertia was easier than change, because alone was simpler than connected. Because if you didn't let anyone close, they couldn't hurt you when they inevitably left. But that wasn't choosing. That was just hiding. Smoke Ears was 10 feet away now, close enough that Tansy could see the scars on his hide, the places where wire or rope or rough handling had left their marks. Close enough to see the intelligence in his eyes, and the fear, and underneath both buried so deep most people would never notice something that might have been hope. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. When had she last felt hope? Real hope, not just the grim determination to survive another winter. The donkey stopped 5 feet away. This was as close as he could manage, at least for today. His entire body trembled with the effort of overcoming his instincts, of staying when everything in him wanted to run. "Good," Tansy said softly. "That's good. That's enough." Very slowly, she lowered herself to sit cross-legged on the ground. The movement made Smokey-Ears flinch, but he didn't bolt. She set her walking stick beside her, within easy reach, but not threatening. Then she simply sat, looking not at him but past him, giving him space to be near her without the pressure of direct attention. The sun was getting low now, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Tansy's stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since dawn, and her legs were stiff from standing so long. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the wild donkey standing 5 feet away, choosing maybe for the first time in 3 years not to run. Behind her, she heard Calder's voice, quieter than before. "I'll be damned." Tansy didn't respond. She just sat in the dust of the corral, feeling the weight of the photograph in her pocket, feeling the ache of old grief and new possibility tangled together in her chest. And she breathed and waited and hoped that tomorrow Smokey-Ears would remember this moment, this small, fragile moment when something new became possible. The bridle Tansy brought down from the mountain the next day was old, but beautifully maintained. The leather was soft from years of careful oiling, the bit smooth and gentle, nothing like the harsh equipment hanging in the general store. She'd packed it away 20 years ago, told herself she'd never need it again. Told herself a lot of things that were turning out to be less true than she'd believed. She arrived at the corral just after dawn, before most of the town was awake. The quiet suited her. It meant no audience, no pressure, no Calder Brinks watching with his mixture of skepticism and grudging curiosity. Smokey-Ears was waiting in his usual corner, but something had changed. When Tansy climbed over the fence, he didn't pin his ears back, didn't brace for flight. He just watched. Alert, yes. Cautious, absolutely. But not quite as wild-eyed as yesterday. "Morning," Tansy said quietly, settling herself on the ground in the same spot as before. The bridle lay across her lap, plainly visible but not threatening. "I brought something to show you. No pressure, just so you can see it, smell it, get used to it being near." She knew talking to animals didn't mean they understood the words. But tone mattered. Rhythm mattered. The act of speaking calmly was as much for her benefit as his. It kept her centered, kept her from rushing, kept her human nervousness from bleeding into the space between them. Smokey-Ears took 3 steps closer than he had yesterday. 7 feet away now, maybe 8. His neck stretched out, nostrils working, trying to catch her scent and the scent of the leather. Tansy lifted the bridle slowly, held it up so he could see it clearly, then set it down again. No sudden movements, no tricks, just here's a thing, here's what I have. You can look or not look, your choice. The donkey's ears flicked forward, genuinely curious now. He took another step. "That's right," Tansy murmured. "Nothing scary, just old leather and metal. Probably smells like dust and mountains. Maybe a little like me, since I've been carrying it." Another step. 6 feet now. The memory came sharper this time, harder to push away. Emma in the barn, holding a bridle up to the light, examining the stitching with the intensity she brought to everything. "Mama, why do some bits have these curls on the sides?" "Those are called rings, sweetheart. They give you better control, but you have to be gentle with them." "Everything's about being gentle, isn't it?" "With horses, yes. With most things, actually." Emma had smiled at that, her whole face lighting up with understanding. She'd always been quick that way, quick to see connections others missed. Would have made a fine trainer herself, given time. Given time. Tansy's vision blurred slightly. She blinked it clear, forced herself back to the present. Smoke Ears was 4 feet away now, close enough to touch if she reached out. She didn't reach out. The sun climbed higher. Town sounds began to filter in a truck starting, voices calling back and forth, the general store's door chime. Normal sounds of normal life, the kind Tansy had excised from her world so thoroughly she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to exist in the midst of people, noise, connection. Smoke Ears lowered, his head until his muzzle was inches from the bridle. He sniffed deeply, then snorted, then sniffed again. Testing. Learning. "It won't hurt you," Tansy said. "I promise. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just—" She paused, surprised by what she was about to say. "I'm just here to understand you, and maybe for you to understand me." The donkey's dark eyes found hers. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Two damaged creatures who'd survived by refusing to be vulnerable, now sitting in the dust of a corral at dawn, taking the first tentative steps toward something neither of them had a name for. Then Smoke Ears did something that stole Tansy's breath. He reached out and touched her knee with his muzzle, just a whisper of contact, barely there, and then gone. But it had happened. Tansy didn't move, didn't react, didn't try to turn that small gesture into more than it was. She just sat there, heart hammering against her ribs, feeling the ghost of that touch like a brand. "Well now," she whispered. That was brave. Footsteps behind her broke the spell. Smoke Ears spooked backward, putting 10 feet between them in a heartbeat. Tansy's jaw tightened with frustration as she turned to see who'd interrupted. Lily Brinks stood at the fence, one hand covering her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to. I was just—" She stopped, seemed to gather herself. "I saw what just happened. He touched you." "He did." Tansy stood slowly, brushing dust from her jeans. "And now we'll have to build back up to it." "I'm sorry," Lily said again, and she looked genuinely distressed. "I should have stayed back. I've been coming here early the last few mornings, watching you work with him. It's—" She stopped again, searching for words. "It's beautiful. What you're doing. The patience of it." Tansy studied the younger woman more carefully. Up close, she could see the shadows under Lily's eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the posture of someone who carried burdens they didn't talk about. "You're here early a lot?" Tansy asked. "It's quiet. Before the ranch wakes up, before Ben needs something, before Calder starts assigning tasks. Just quiet." Lily's fingers twisted together. "I like watching you with Smoke Ears. It's like watching someone speak a language I've forgotten. You work with animals?" "Used to. Before I married Ben, I trained horses on my family's ranch. Nothing fancy, just basic groundwork. But I loved it." Her voice softened with memory. "I loved the challenge of it. The way you had to meet each animal where they were, not where you wanted them to be." "What happened?" Lily's expression closed off slightly. "Ben's family doesn't think women should do ranch work. Not real ranch work, anyway. Calder says it's not appropriate. Ben agrees with whatever his father says." She said it matter-of-factly, but Tansy heard the resignation underneath, the slow suffocation of someone whose world had due to gotten smaller and smaller until they could barely breathe. "So you come here," Tansy said, "to remember." "To remember." "Yes." Lily looked at Smoke Ears, who was still pressed against the far fence, watching them both with wary eyes. "Do you think you can really help him?" "I don't know, but I think he's worth trying for. Even though he might never be what they want him to be? Even though he might always be difficult?" Tansy heard the question underneath the question. Being difficult isn't a flaw. Sometimes it's the only reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. Lily's eyes met hers, sharp and searching. Then she nodded slowly, like Tansy had confirmed something she'd been thinking but hadn't dared to say aloud. "I should go," Lily said, "before Ben wonders where I am. But could I come back, tomorrow maybe? Just to watch? It's not my corral. You don't need my permission." "I know," But I'm asking anyway. There was something in the request that touched Tansy, despite her better judgment. A recognition, maybe, a sense that Lily was asking for more than just permission to observe a donkey being gentled. "Come when you want," Tansy said. "Early's best. Less distraction." Lily's face lit with a smile that transformed her, made her look younger and less burdened. "Thank you. Really. Thank you." She left quickly, glancing back once before disappearing around the corner of the general store. Tansy watched her go, feeling oddly unsettled. She'd come down from the mountain for supplies and somehow ended up not just working with a traumatized donkey, but also becoming a what? A confidant? A mentor? Neither role felt comfortable. Both felt dangerous in ways she couldn't quite name. She turned back to the corral. Smoky Ears was still pressed against the far fence, but his ears were forward again, tracking her movements. "Just you and me," Tansy said quietly. "Everyone else is extra." She settled back onto the ground, picked up the bridle, and waited. The sun climbed higher. The town woke up fully, voices and vehicles creating a backdrop of normal life. And slowly, carefully, Smoke Ears began the long journey back across the corral, drawn by something he couldn't name but couldn't quite resist, the pull of someone who understood that healing couldn't be rushed, only invited. By the time Tansy finally left to get her supplies, Smoke Ears had come close enough to sniff the bridle 3 more times. She'd managed to loop one finger through his forelock just for a second, just enough to feel the coarse hair and the warmth beneath before he danced away again. Progress, she thought, shouldering her pack for the long walk home. Small, hard-won, imperfect progress. The photograph in her pocket seemed to weigh more than usual as she climbed back toward Broken Tooth Ridge. She stopped halfway up, breathing hard, and pulled it out. Looked at it for the first time in years. Emma smiled up at her from the creased paper, gap-toothed and bright-eyed, standing next to Copper with one small hand on the mare's neck. 10 years old in the photo. 2 years before, Tansy folded it carefully, slipped it back into her pocket. Tomorrow she'd come back down. Tomorrow she'd try again. Tomorrow maybe Smoke Ears would let her touch him for more than a heartbeat. And maybe, just maybe, she'd figure out why helping a broken donkey felt like the first real thing she'd done in 20 years. The crayon drawing had slipped out of Tansy's pack when she set it down too quickly, and by the time she noticed, Lily was already picking it up. The younger woman's face went soft with immediate understanding. "You had a daughter," Lily said quietly. Not a question. Tansy's first instinct was to snatch the drawing back, to retreat behind the wall she'd maintained for 20 years. But Lily's tone held no pity, no judgment, just recognition, and somehow that made it harder to deflect. "A long time ago," Tansy said. "Finally." How old was she when she drew this? 6, maybe 7. She loved drawing mountains, said they looked like sleeping giants. Lily studied the crude sketch stick figure labeled Mama, standing next to peaked triangles meant to be mountains, purple sky, green grass, a yellow circle for the sun with lines radiating out like it was shouting, "May I ask what happened to her?" And there it was, the question Tansy had been avoiding for 2 decades. She could deflect again, could take the drawing and change the subject, could retreat into the comfortable silence that had protected her for so long. Instead, she heard herself say, "School bus accident, 20 years ago this winter." She was 12. The words came out flat, emotionless, but Tansy felt them like stones in her chest. She hadn't said Emma's age out loud in years, hadn't talked about the accident with another human being since she couldn't even remember, since before the mountain. Lily carefully set the drawing on top of Tansy's pack. "I'm so sorry." Everyone was sorry. Tansy didn't mean it to sound bitter, but it did anyway. Sorry didn't change anything. No, I suppose it wouldn't. They stood in silence, watching Smoke Ears browse at a hay pile. Tansy had convinced Calder to leave in the corral. The donkey, still startled at sudden movements, still kept a wary distance most of the time, but he'd started to associate Tansy's presence with calm rather than threat. Small victories. "Is that why you went to the mountain?" Lily asked. "Because of your daughter?" "I went because I couldn't stand being in a world where she wasn't. Every street corner reminded me, every kid on a bike, every school bus that passed by." Tansy's voice caught, but she pushed through, and everyone looked at me like I was broken, like I was fragile, like I might shatter if they said the wrong thing. So I left. "And your husband?" "Ex-husband." He stayed, tried to work through it in his own way. We couldn't grieve together. We kept pulling each other under instead of helping each other float." She paused. "Last I heard, he remarried. I hope he's happy. I really do." Lily nodded slowly. "Grief is strange. The way it isolates you, even when you're surrounded by people who care." Something in her tone made Tansy look at her more closely. "You sound like you know something about that." "My mother died when I was 19. Cancer. We knew it was coming for months, but knowing didn't make it easier." Lily's fingers traced patterns on the fence rail. "Ben and I had just started dating. He was well, he seemed solid, steady, like an anchor in the storm. So, when he proposed a year later, I said yes, thought I was choosing security. But, security and prison can look very similar from the outside." Lily's laugh was bitter. "Ben's not cruel, neither is Calder. They're just fixed, in their ways, their beliefs, their understanding of how things should be. And I've spent 10 years trying to fit myself into a shape that doesn't match who I am." Tansy recognized the ache in those words. She'd felt something similar with her own husband after Emma died, the way grief had carved her into a different shape, and the old life no longer fit. "Why stay?" Tansy asked. "Where would I go? My family's ranch was sold after my mother died. I don't have the money to start over, and Ben, he's not bad. He's just—" She trailed off, searching for words that wouldn't come, "just not who you need him to be." "Yes." Lily looked relieved to have it named. "Exactly that." Before Tansy could respond, Calder's truck pulled up to the corral. He climbed out slowly, still favoring his injured ribs, and walked over to join them at the fence. His eyes immediately went to Smoke Ears, assessing. "Making progress?" he asked. "Some," Tansy said. "He's eating hay without checking for threats every 30 seconds. That's something. But he'll still let you near him?" "Close enough to matter," Calder grunted. "Ben's been asking about that donkey. Wants to know when we're going to make a decision about him." Lily's jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. "What kind of decision?" Tansy asked, though she already knew. "Whether to keep trying or cut our losses. Animal's been nothing but trouble for 3 years. Ben thinks we should sell him off to someone who doesn't mind a project. Or," he paused, "or put him down if no one wants him." "You can't," Lily said immediately. "Not after all this. Not when Tansy's finally making progress." "Progress doesn't pay bills or mend fences," Calder said. But his tone was gentler with his daughter-in-law than it had been. "And Ben's got a point. We've invested a lot of time and money in an animal that might never be useful." "Useful," Tansy repeated. "That's what matters? Whether he's useful?" Calder's expression hardened. "This is a working ranch, not a sanctuary. Every animal needs to earn its keep. And if they can't, if they're damaged beyond what you consider acceptable, then we make hard choices. That's part of ranching." Tansy felt anger stirring, hot and unfamiliar. She'd spent 20 years dampening down her emotions, keeping everything at arm's length. But standing here, listening to Calder discuss Smoke Ears, like he was broken equipment instead of a living creature, it touched something raw. "He's not damaged," she said, voice low and controlled. "He's traumatized. There's a difference. Damaged things can't heal. Traumatized things can, if they're given the chance." "And how long does that chance last?" Calder asked. "Weeks? Months? Years? At what point do we admit defeat? When the animal tells us to, not when our patience runs out. They stared at each other, two stubborn souls locked in an argument that was only partially about the donkey. Tansy could see something flickering in Calder's eyes, recognition, maybe, or shame, or both. Finally, he looked away. I'll give you 2 more weeks. After that, Ben makes the call. He walked back to his truck, moving stiffly, and drove away without another word. Lily let out a breath she'd been holding. Thank you for standing up to him. I didn't do it for thanks, I know. But still, Lily paused. He respects you, I can tell. He'd never admit it, but he does. Tansy wasn't sure what to do with that information, so she filed it away and turned her attention back to Smoke Ears. The donkey had moved closer to the fence during the confrontation, drawn by their voices, or maybe by curiosity. He stood about 8 feet away, ears forward, watching. 2 weeks, Tansy said quietly. That's what we've got. Is that enough time? I don't know. Depends on what we're trying to accomplish. If the goal is to make him behave like a regular donkey, probably not. If the goal is to help him feel safe enough to trust, maybe. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, what's it like? On the mountain, living alone all that time? The question caught Tansy off guard. Quiet, she said finally. Simple. Safe. Lonely? Yes, but lonely in a way you can control. That's different than being lonely around people. I understand that, Lily said softly. I'm lonely in my own house most days, surrounded by family, and still alone. Tansy looked at the younger woman and saw herself 20 years ago, saw the desperation, the feeling of being trapped, the yearning for something different, even when you couldn't name what that something was. The mountain's not an answer, Tansy said. Running away, it helps at first, gives you space to breathe. But eventually, you're just alone with yourself, and if you don't like who that is, geography doesn't change anything. But it gave you time, didn't it? To grieve without everyone watching? It did, but it also let me hide. There's a difference between healing and hiding, and I'm not sure I've figured out which one I was doing. A small sound made them both turn. Smoke Ears had moved even closer, near enough now that Tansy could reach out and touch him if she extended her arm. He wasn't looking at either of them directly, but his whole posture had softened. The rigid fear had eased into something more like caution mixed with possibility. Tansy climbed into the corral slowly. This time, Smoke Ears didn't bolt. He shifted his weight, uncertain, but held his ground. That's brave, Tansy murmured, moving toward him with deliberate slowness. That's so brave. She stopped 3 feet away, extended her hand, palm down, letting him see it, smell it, decide. Smoke Ears' nostrils flared, his ears twitched, every muscle in his body was taut with the effort of not running. And then slowly, carefully, like it cost him everything he had, he stretched his neck out and touched his muzzle to her palm. Tansy's eyes burned with unexpected tears. She blinked them back, focusing on the velvet softness of his nose, the warm breath against her skin, the tremor running through his body. This small connection, this tiny act of trust, after so much fear, it mattered. It meant something. Behind her, she heard Lily's soft exhale. Beautiful, the younger woman whispered. Yes, Tansy thought, and terrifying, because trust was always terrifying, because opening yourself to connection meant opening yourself to loss, because caring about anyone meant giving them the power to hurt you. But standing here, with her hand touching a broken animal who'd somehow found the courage to try again, Tansy felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, opening, like ice fracturing in spring thaw, making way for something new to emerge. She didn't know what that something was yet, didn't know if she had the strength to sustain it, but for the first time in 20 years, she was willing to find out. The silver locket had been a gift from Emma on Tansy's 40th birthday. A child's choice, sweet and earnest, silver-plated metal from the craft store, with a chain that had turned her neck slightly green until she'd replaced it with something better. Inside were two tiny photographs, Emma at 8 and Emma at 11, both smiling with that gap-toothed grin that had made Tansy's heart squeeze every single time. She hadn't opened the locket in years, wore it under her shirt where no one could see it, where it pressed against her sternum like a second heartbeat, a reminder, a penance, a way of keeping Emma close, even though close was the last thing Tansy had let herself be to anyone in 2 decades. But lying in her cabin that night, sleepless and restless, she found herself unclasping the chain and holding the locket in her palm. The metal was warm from her body heat. She opened it carefully, the tiny hinge protesting slightly. Emma looked back at her from the photographs. Frozen forever in childhood, forever on the edge of becoming whoever she might have been. Tansy traced the images with one finger, feeling the smoothness of the protective plastic, and let herself remember. The day Emma had given her the locket, she'd been so proud. "I saved my allowance for 3 months, Mama. Do you like it?" "I love it, sweetheart. You have to put pictures in it. Pictures of me, so you'll always remember. I could never forget you." But Emma had insisted, had picked out the photos herself and helped Tansy fit them into the tiny frames. Then she'd clasped the necklace around Tansy's neck with careful fingers. "There. Now we're always together, always together." Tansy closed the locket and pressed it to her chest, feeling the grief rise up sharp and sudden like it had 20 years ago. You'd think time would dull it, would soften the edges until the pain became manageable. But grief didn't work that way. It went underground. Yes, it became something you carried instead of something that carried you. But it never really faded. It just learned to wait. She must have slept eventually, because dawn woke her, sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window, birds calling in the pines. She dressed automatically, grabbed her pack, and started down the mountain before she could talk herself out of it. The note had been slipped under a fence rail at the corral, folded once, and weighted with a stone. Tansy found it when she arrived just after sunrise, before anyone else was around. "I know who you are. Meet me at the diner. Noon. Come alone. No signature, no explanation." Just those 2 sentences in handwriting she didn't recognize. Tansy's first instinct was to ignore it, to burn the note and pretend she'd never seen it. But curiosity and a cold thread of fear wouldn't let her. Someone knew. Someone had connected the mountain woman to whoever she'd been before, and they wanted to talk about it. She spent the morning with smoke ears, trying to focus, but her mind kept drifting to the note. Who had found her? What did they want? Would they tell the town, spread her history around like gossip? The donkey sensed her distraction. He was skittish, more uncertain than he'd been in days. Tansy forced herself to center, to breathe, to be present. She'd learned on the mountain that animals reflected your energy. If you brought chaos, they gave you chaos back. "Sorry," she murmured to him. "My head's not here today. That's not fair to you." Smoke Ears watched her with those dark, knowing eyes. After a moment, he took a step closer, then another, until he was near enough to rest his chin on her shoulder. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that Tansy felt her throat close up. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching up slowly to stroke his neck. "I needed that." At 1:45, she climbed out of the corral and walked toward the diner. Her heart was hammering, palms sweating despite the cool autumn air. She felt exposed in a way she hadn't in years, like the protective shell she'd built around herself was cracking, leaving her vulnerable to whatever came next. The diner was mostly empty, just a few locals having late breakfast. Tansy spotted him immediately. Calder Brinks, sitting in a back booth, 2 cups of coffee already on the table. She stopped in the doorway, confused. "You?" He gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit down, please." Tansy's mind raced. "Calder?" He was the one who'd found out? She approached the table slowly, every instinct screaming at her to run. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said as she sat. "And I'm not planning to tell anyone anything. I needed to talk to you. Private-like. How did you find out?" I got curious. "After watching you with smoke ears, I wanted to understand what made you different. So I did some digging. Old newspaper archives, mostly. Took me a while to put the pieces together, but I found the accident report. Found your daughter's name. Found your name as next of kin." He paused, his weathered face troubled. "I'm sorry. About Emma. About all of it." Tansy's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. "What do you want?" "To tell you I understand." Calder wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "My wife, Margot, she died 6 years ago. Appendicitis, of all things. She'd been having pain for days, but I told her she was being dramatic. Said she just needed to rest, take some aspirin, quit fussing. By the time I finally took her to the hospital, infection had spread. She died 2 days later." He said it without emotion, but Tansy could see the cost in his eyes. "I killed her," he continued. "Not with my hands, but with my pride, my stubbornness, my certainty that I knew better than she did about her own body." He looked up, met Tansy's gaze directly. "So when I see you working with that donkey, when I see the patience you bring, the gentleness, I recognize it. You're trying to save something you couldn't save before. Just like I've been trying to prove, I'm not the man who let his wife die because he was too proud to listen." Tansy felt something shift in her chest. "That's why you kept challenging me, why you seemed so angry." "I wasn't angry at you. I was angry at myself. You came down from that mountain and did what I couldn't, admitted weakness, asked for help, showed vulnerability, and I hated that. Hated that you were braver than me." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a truck rattled past. Someone laughed in the kitchen. "The newspaper reports," Tansy said finally. "What did they say? You want the truth?" "I want whatever you found." Calder pulled a folded photocopy from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "This is from the investigation. The bus driver lost control on ice. Multiple witnesses. The highway patrol concluded there was nothing anyone could have done differently. It was an accident. Pure and simple." Tansy's hands wouldn't cooperate enough to unfold the paper. Calder did it for her, gently, and turned it, so she could read. The official language blurred in front of her eyes, but certain phrases stood out. "No negligence found. Unavoidable circumstances. No individual culpability." At the bottom, a list of witnesses who testified that the roads had been impossibly icy, that the bus had been properly maintained, that Emma's mother had done everything right, had ensured Emma was at the stop on time, had packed her a lunch, had reminded her to stay seated until the bus reached school. "I blamed myself," Tansy whispered. "I should have driven her that day. I should have kept her home. I should have—" "You should have what? Predicted the future? Controlled the weather?" Calder's voice was gentle but firm. "Tansy, I've read this thing a dozen times. There's nothing you could have done. Nothing anyone could have done. Then why does it still feel like my fault?" "Because that's what grief does. It looks for someone to blame, and when there's no one else, it turns on you." He leaned forward. "I know because I do the same thing. I replay that week with Margot over and over. Every moment I dismissed her pain, every time I told her to quit complaining. And I think if only I'd listened, if only I'd been different, if only. Does it ever stop? The replaying? No. But it gets less loud, less constant, especially if you let other people in. If you stop hiding." Tansy looked at him, really looked, and saw the same exhaustion she carried, the same weight. "You've been hiding too, just differently than me." "I have. Behind work, behind being the tough rancher, behind making sure everyone sees me as strong so they don't see what I really am. A man who couldn't save his wife and can't forgive himself for it. So why tell me this? Why now? Calder leaned back, sighing. Because watching you with that donkey has taught me something. You're showing him that the world doesn't have to be a constant threat. That trust is possible. That healing, real healing, starts with letting someone see your wounds. And you want me to let people see mine? I want you to consider that maybe 20 years is long enough to hide. That maybe Emma wouldn't want you up on that mountain, punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. The mention of Emma's name in Calder's mouth should have felt like a violation. Instead, it felt like permission. Like someone finally saying aloud what Tansy had been too afraid to think. I don't know how to be in the world anymore, she admitted. I don't know how to be around people without the mountain between us. Then maybe you start small, like with smoke ears. One step at a time. One moment of trust at a time. Tansy looked down at the report, at the words that absolved her of guilt, even though guilt had been her constant companion for 2 decades. Part of her wanted to reject it, to insist she was still to blame, because blame was familiar. Blame gave her something to hold on to. But another part, the part that had felt Smokey's breath on her palm, that had heard Lily's loneliness and recognized it as her own, that had carved 20 notches into a walking stick and wondered if there might someday be a reason to stop counting that part, wanted to believe, wanted to accept that maybe, just maybe, she'd been carrying a burden that was never hers to bear. I don't know if I can do this, she said quietly. Neither do I, Calder replied. Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together. 2 stubborn fools learning how to forgive themselves. He stood, dropped money on the table for the coffee, and put a hand briefly on her shoulder. Take the report. Read it when you're ready. And tomorrow come back to that corral. Finish what you started with Smoke Ears. He needs you. He needs me. We all do, Tansy. We just didn't know it until you showed up. He left her sitting there with the photocopy on the table and 20 years of self-imposed exile suddenly feeling less like protection and more like prison. And Tansy Braddock, who'd thought she'd learned everything there was to know about survival, realized she'd never actually learned how to live. The yellowed newspaper clipping that fell out of the photocopy was dated 3 weeks after Emma's death. Tansy had never seen it before, had never looked at any news coverage, had been too consumed by grief to read anything about the accident. But here it was, in brittle newsprint, with a headline that made her hands shake: Community mourns beloved girl. Investigation clears mother of all responsibility. She read it, standing in the corral at dawn, Smoke Ears watching her from his corner with what looked like concern. The article detailed the investigation's findings, included quotes from multiple witnesses, even mentioned that the school district had implemented new safety protocols because of the accident, not because anyone was at fault, but because systems could always be improved. And there, in the final paragraph, Emma Braddock's mother, Tansy, could not be reached for comment. Neighbors report that the family has requested privacy during this difficult time. Privacy. That's what they'd called it. But Tansy knew the truth. She'd already started disappearing by then. Already stopped answering the door, stopped picking up the phone, stopped being present anywhere except in her own spiraling grief. Her husband had tried. For weeks, maybe months, he'd tried to reach her. But she'd been unreachable, drowning in guilt that this article proved was unfounded. And eventually, he'd stopped trying. He'd had to, probably, to save himself. She folded the papers carefully and slipped them into her shirt pocket next to the locket. Evidence of her innocence, worn close to her heart where guilt had lived for 20 years. Morning. She turned to find Calder approaching the fence, moving easier today, his ribs clearly healing. He looked different, somehow lighter, maybe. Or maybe it was just that Tansy was seeing him differently now that she understood what drove him. I read it, she said. All of it. And I don't know what to do with it. I've spent 20 years believing I was responsible. That if I'd just done something different, anything different, Emma would still be alive. Calder nodded slowly. I spent years believing the same thing about Margot. Still do, most days. But I've been thinking about what you said about trauma versus damage. About how healing means letting go of the story we tell ourselves, even when that story's the only thing holding us together. That's a lot of thinking. I don't sleep much these days. He leaned against the fence, watching Smoke Ears. Been meaning to tell you something else, something I should have said years ago. Tansy waited. Margot knew, he said quietly. About her appendix. About how bad it was. The doctors told me after she knew, days before she told me. She was trying to handle it herself because she didn't want to worry me during calving season. Calder, let me finish. His voice was rough. She knew, and she still didn't push harder to get help, because she'd learned, over 40 years of marriage, that my work always came first, that I'd dismiss her concerns as fussing. That being strong and silent was what I valued. He paused, jaw working. So when I say I killed her, I mean it, not that day with that decision, but over decades of teaching her that her needs came second. That's what killed her. Tansy felt the weight of his confession settle between them. Why are you telling me this? Because I see how you're looking at that report, like it should fix something, like proof of your innocence should make the guilt disappear. He turned to face her. But it won't. I've got proof too, doctor's records, timeline analysis, all of it. Proof that Margot made her own choices. And it doesn't help, because the guilt isn't about facts. It's about surviving when they didn't. Survivor's guilt, that's what the grief counselor called it. The one I saw twice before deciding I was fine and didn't need help. He laughed bitterly. Spent 6 years being fine, being strong, being exactly what everyone expected, and it's been hell. Tansy looked at him, this proud, stubborn man who'd finally cracked himself open enough to let truth out, and felt a kinship she hadn't expected. They were the same, really. Both running from ghosts. Both hiding behind versions of themselves that didn't allow for weakness or grief or the messy work of actually healing. What changed? She asked. What made you decide to stop being fine? You did. He said it simply, without elaboration. Me? Watching you with that donkey, the patience you bring, the way you keep showing up even when progress is invisible, the way you're brave enough to be vulnerable. He gestured toward Smoke Ears. You taught me something, Tansy. You taught me that strength isn't about never breaking, it's about being willing to try again after you've been broken. Before she could respond, Smoke Ears did something unprecedented. He walked across the entire corral and stopped directly in front of them, his nose nearly touching the fence rails. He looked from Tansy to Calder and back again, ears forward, body relaxed, present, curious, almost hopeful. Well, I'll be damned, Calder breathed. He's never done that before. Tansy climbed over the fence slowly, her heart hammering. This was it, the moment she'd been working toward, the breakthrough that meant all the patience and waiting had mattered. She approached Smoke Ears with her hand extended, palm down, giving him every chance to change his mind and bolt. He didn't bolt. Instead, he lowered his head and pressed his forehead against her chest, right where the locket hung beneath her shirt. The weight of him, the trust in the gesture, the complete vulnerability it undid. Something in Tansy that had been locked tight for 20 years. She wrapped her arms around his neck and let herself cry. Not quiet tears, not restrained grief, but full-body sobs that came from somewhere so deep she'd forgotten it existed. She cried for Emma, for lost time, for the marriage that couldn't survive their daughter's death, for 20 years of self-imposed exile. She cried for Smoke Ears and whatever trauma had made him so afraid. She cried for Calder and Margot, for Lily's trapped loneliness, for every wounded soul trying to survive in a world that kept asking them to be stronger than they felt. And Smoke Ears stood perfectly still, bearing her weight, offering comfort in the only way he knew how, through patient presence and the simple gift of not running away. When the storm passed, Tansy pulled back and rested her forehead against the donkey's neck. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting me." Behind her, Calder's voice was rough with emotion. "That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." She turned to look at him, tears still streaming down her face. "Which part?" "All of it. The crying, the accepting comfort, the letting someone see you break." He cleared his throat. "I don't think I've cried since Margot's funeral. Thought it wasn't manly. Thought I had to be strong for Ben, for the ranch hands, for everyone who was watching. And now I think maybe strength looks different than I believed." He pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his silver hair. "I think maybe I've been wrong about a lot of things." Tansy wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Me too." They stood in the quiet morning, two people and a donkey, all of them damaged in different ways, all of them taking tentative steps towards something that might eventually resemble healing. The sun climbed higher. Town sounds filtered in the general store opening, trucks starting, life continuing in its mundane, persistent way. Smoke ears, nuzzled Tansy's pocket, looking for treats. She laughed, actually laughed, and pulled out an apple slice she'd brought. He took it gently from her palm, his velvet lips careful not to touch her skin, and munched contentedly. "I don't want to go back up the mountain," Tansy said suddenly. "Not permanently. Not anymore." Calder looked at her with surprise. "No? I think 20 years is enough. I think Emma would be furious with me for hiding this long. She always wanted me to be brave." Tansy stroked Smokey's neck, feeling the warmth of him, the solid reality of connection. "And I think if I can help this scared animal learn to trust again, maybe I can learn too." "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet, but I can't heal on the mountain. All I do there is survive, and surviving isn't the same as living." Calder nodded slowly. "Then, I've got a cottage on my property, used to be for the ranch foreman, but we've handled things different for years. It's empty, needs some work. But if you wanted a place to stay while you figured things out, I can't pay rent. Didn't ask you to, but you could keep working with Smoke Ears. And maybe you could teach me some of what you know. About patience, about gentleness, about not being so damn stubborn all the time." Tansy looked at him, this man who'd been her adversary and was becoming her friend, and felt something unlock in her chest. Not healing, not yet, but the possibility of healing. The door cracking open just enough to let light in. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." He left her alone with Smoke Ears then, seeming to understand that some moments needed privacy. Tansy stood in the corral as the morning unfolded around her, one hand on the donkey's warm neck, the other touching the locket through her shirt. "Emma," she whispered, "I'm sorry it took me so long. I'm sorry I couldn't be braver sooner, but I'm trying now. I'm really trying." The wind carried her words away. "No," answer came, because no answer was possible. But somehow, standing there with a formerly wild donkey who'd learned to trust her, Tansy felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Not forgiveness exactly, but the distant possibility of it. The sense that maybe, someday, she could forgive herself for surviving when Emma hadn't, and maybe that was enough to start with. The letter had been folded so many times the creases had worn thin, almost transparent. Tansy found it tucked in a drawer in her cabin, one of dozens she'd written over the years and never sent. This one was addressed to her ex-husband, dated 5 years ago, written during a winter so cold and lonely she'd almost walked off the mountain and never come back. Asterisk. "Dear Michael, asterisk, asterisk. I don't expect you to read this. I don't even know if I'll send it. But I need to write it anyway, need to get these words out of my head and onto paper where I can see them. Asterisk, asterisk, I'm sorry. For leaving, for not being strong enough to grieve with you, for choosing solitude over the hard work of healing together. You deserved better than a wife who couldn't bear to look at you because you reminded her of everything we'd lost. Asterisk, asterisk. I hope you're happy now. I hope you've found peace in ways I haven't been able to find. And I hope I hope you've forgiven me, because I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. Asterisk, asterisk. Tansy. Times. She read it in the thin dawn light, then read it again. The woman who'd written this letter was drowning, desperate, barely holding on. Tansy remembered that Winter remembered seriously considering just walking into the snow and not coming back. The only thing that had stopped her was the stubborn, animal instinct to survive. Nothing noble, nothing brave, just the body's refusal to quit even when the mind wanted to. But she wasn't that woman anymore. Or maybe she was, but she'd found reasons to be more than just surviving. Smoke ears. Calder's unexpected friendship. Lily's quiet hope. The town that had watched her work with the donkey and hadn't judged, hadn't pitied, had just witnessed. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pack, along with the newer one she'd written last night. This one said different things, offered different truths, and she was going to mail it today, before she could talk herself out of it. The mountain looked different this morning as she descended for what might be the last time as a permanent resident. She'd decided to accept Calder's offer of the cottage, at least temporarily. Would come back for her things over the next few days, gradually transition from mountain woman to what? Valley woman? Just woman? She didn't know yet, and that uncertainty was frightening in a way that felt almost like excitement. The corral was empty when she arrived. Harold from the general store was standing at the fence, looking worried. "He's gone," Harold said as Tansy approached. "Sometime last night. Broke through the back fence, must have finally panicked bad enough to just crash right through." Tansy's stomach dropped. "Where?" "Tracks head toward the mountain. Calder's putting together a search party. Says the animal's probably hurt, definitely spooked, might be dangerous if cornered." "He's not dangerous. He's terrified. Tell that to Calder. Man's got his rifle and everything." "His rifle?" Tansy's voice went sharp. "He's planning to shoot Smoke Ears? If he can't be caught safe, yeah. That's Ben's order. Says they've tried long enough, and a dangerous animal loose in the hills is a liability." Tansy was moving before Harold finished talking, heading toward the mountain at a run. Behind her she heard him call out, but she didn't stop. Smoke Ears needed her. After everything, after all the trust he'd built, all the progress he'd made, he was out there alone and scared, and men with rifles were hunting him like he was nothing more than a problem to solve. She found Calder's search party an hour into the hills. 6 men, all on horseback, following tracks that led higher into the rough terrain. Calder saw her coming and held up a hand to stop the group. "Tansy, go back. This isn't safe. You're not shooting him. If we can catch him alive, we will. But Ben's right. We can't have a dangerous animal running wild. Someone could get hurt. He's not dangerous. He's scared. There's a difference, and you know it." Calder's jaw tightened. "I know. But Ben owns the ranch, and Ben's made the decision. My hands are tied." "Then untie them." Lily's voice came from behind the group. She rode forward on her own horse, dressed in work clothes and looking more determined than Tansy had ever seen her. "This is wrong, and you know it. We can't kill him just because he's inconvenient. This isn't your decision, Lily," one of the other men said. Ben, Tansy realized. Calder's son, Lily's husband. He had the same stubborn set to his jaw as his father, but without the complexity, without the doubt, just certainty. "It's not yours either," Lily shot back. "That donkey belongs to the ranch, which means it belongs to this family. And I'm part of this family, even if you all forget that sometimes." "Lily, don't do this here," Ben said, his tone warning. "Where should I do it? In private, where no one has to hear me? Where I can be quiet and obedient and never challenge anything?" Her voice was shaking but firm. "I'm done being quiet, Ben. I'm done pretending everything's fine when it's not." The tension crackled between them. Tansy could see the other men shifting uncomfortably, not sure where to look. This was a family matter spilling into public, the kind of thing small-town people witnessed and remembered. "We'll talk about this at home," Ben said tightly. "No. We'll talk about it now." Lily turned to Calder. "You told me yesterday that Tansy taught you about strength, about how it's not about never breaking, but about trying again after you've been broken. Do you remember that?" Calder nodded slowly. "Then be strong enough to stand up to your son. Tell him this is wrong. Tell him that killing smoke ears isn't solving a problem, it's creating one. It's teaching everyone watching that when something's difficult, when it doesn't fit our expectations, we eliminate it instead of adapting." "That's enough," Ben said. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No," Lily said quietly. "I'm finally being honest. And if that embarrasses you, then maybe you should ask yourself, why?" The standoff held for a long moment. Then Calder cleared his throat and dismounted. He walked over to Ben's horse and looked up at his son. "She's right," Calder said. "This is wrong, and I won't be part of it." "Dad!" "No, you listen to me now." Calder's voice was firm, but not angry. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Most of them came from being too proud to admit when I was wrong, too stubborn to change course, even when the path I was on was clearly destructive. And I'm done making those mistakes. We have to do something about the donkey. We do, but shooting him isn't it. If Tansy thinks she can find him, bring him back safe, we let her try. And if she can't, then we deal with that when it comes. But we give her the chance first." Ben's face was red, whether from anger or embarrassment. Tansy couldn't tell. "This is my ranch." "No," Calder interrupted. "It's our ranch. Mine, and yours, and Lily's, and everyone who works here. And we make decisions together, not by decree." Father and son stared at each other. Finally, Ben jerked his head in a nod. "Fine, 24 hours. If the donkey's not back by tomorrow morning, we do this my way." He turned his horse and rode back down the mountain, the other men following after an awkward pause. Only Calder and Lily remained. "Thank you," Lily said to her father-in-law, "for standing up to him." "I know that wasn't easy. Should have done it years ago," Calder replied. "Should have done a lot of things differently." He turned to Tansy. "You really think you can find him?" "I can find him. Whether he'll come with me, that's the question." "What do you need?" "Time. Quiet. And a promise that no one else comes looking. He's had enough of being chased." Calder nodded. "You got it. I'll keep everyone away. But Tansy, be careful. He's hurt and scared animals do unpredictable things." "So do scared people," Tansy replied. "And I've been both, so I understand what he's going through." She left them there and continued up the mountain, following tracks that were clear even to her untrained eye. Smoke Ears had run hard and fast, probably driven by pure panic. The fence break had likely been an accident. He'd spooked at something, thrown himself against the rails, and they'd given way. And then, finding himself suddenly free, he'd done what all frightened creatures do. He'd run for the highest, most isolated place he could find. The terrain grew rougher. Tansy had to slow down, pick her way carefully over loose shale and around boulders. The tracks led higher, toward the ridge country she knew intimately. Her country, her mountain. "That's where you are," she murmured. "You're heading for the same place I've been hiding." The sun climbed higher. Tansy's legs burned from the climb, and her pack felt heavier than usual despite being mostly empty. She stopped occasionally to drink water, to study the tracks, to listen for any sound that might tell her Smoke Ears was near. Mid-afternoon, she found blood. Not much, just spots on the rocks, dark and fresh. Smoke Ears had cut himself breaking through the fence, or maybe in his panicked flight up the mountain. Either way, he was hurt and alone and probably desperate. "I'm coming," she called out, not caring if he could hear her or not. "I'm coming, and I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." The tracks led to a narrow ledge, barely wide enough for a donkey, definitely too narrow for comfort, and there, pressed against the rock face, with his sides heaving and his eyes rolling with fear, was Smoke Ears. Blood streaked his shoulder where barbed wire had caught him. His legs trembled from exhaustion and terror. When he saw Tansy, he tried to back up, and his hind legs slipped on the crumbling edge. "Easy," Tansy said, her voice calm, despite the fear spiking through her. "Easy now. Don't move, just stay still. I'm coming to you." She assessed the situation quickly. The ledge was too narrow to turn around on. If Smoke Ears spooked forward, he'd crash into her, and they'd both fall. If he spooked backward, he'd go over the edge, a 30-foot drop onto rocks that would kill him instantly. She had one chance to do this right. One chance to reach him, calm him, and guide him back to safety. And if she failed, if her nerve broke or his fear won, or the ledge crumbled, they'd both pay the price. Tansy thought of Emma. Thought of 20 years spent hiding from life because life hurt too much. Thought of Calder learning to be vulnerable, Lily finding her courage, Smoke Ears learning to trust despite everything that had taught him not to. And she thought, this is what living looks like. This is what it means to step off the mountain and back into the world. Risk and fear and the possibility of falling, but also the possibility of connection, of healing, of becoming whole again. She took a breath, adjusted her pack, and stepped onto the ledge. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's go home." The braided rope in Tansy's pack had been made during her first winter on the mountain, woven from tough mountain grass during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. She'd made it without any clear purpose, her hands needing work while her mind tried to process grief. 20 feet of rough but strong cord, good for hauling firewood or securing supplies. Or, as it turned out, for saving a frightened donkey on a crumbling ledge. She pulled it out slowly, keeping her, movements small and controlled. The ledge was maybe 18 inches wide here, narrower, where Smoke Ears stood pressed against the rock. Every step required absolute precision. One wrong move, one moment of imbalance, and the whole situation would collapse. "I know you're scared," Tansy said, her voice low and steady. "I know this feels impossible, but we're going to get through it together, you and me. Just like we've gotten through everything else." Smoke Ears' eyes were white-rimmed with panic. His breathing came in harsh, rapid bursts. Blood from his shoulder wound dripped onto the stone, making small, dark spots that looked like accusations. This was her fault, in a way. If she'd never started working with him, he might never have tried to escape, might never have ended up here, trapped between rock and air, with death one wrong step away. But that kind of thinking was the old Tansy, the woman who'd spent 20 years blaming herself for things she couldn't control. This, Tansy, the one standing on a narrow ledge, trying to save a life instead of hide from one she knew better. Smoke Ears had made his own choices, driven by his own fears. All she could do was be present, be steady, and offer him a way back to safety. The rope felt right in her hands, familiar, solid. She fashioned a simple loop, nothing fancy, just enough to go around Smoke Ears' neck without tightening. Not a noose, not a tool of control, just connection. A physical link between them that said, "I'm here, you're not alone, we'll do this together. I'm going to come closer now," she murmured. "Real slow. You just keep breathing. That's all you have to do, just breathe." She took one step. The ledge held. Another step. Smoke Ears trembled but didn't bolt. 3 feet between them now, close enough to see the sweat darkening his coat, to smell the iron scent of blood and the musk of fear. Below them, she heard voices. The search party had found them. She recognized Calder's shout, telling people to stay back. Don't spook them. Give Tansy room to work. Smart man. Understanding finally that sometimes the best help was just staying out of the way. "That's it," Tansy said, extending the rope slowly. "See? Nothing scary. Just me and you and this rope, and we're going to use it to help you get down safe." Smoke Ears snorted, a harsh sound that held all his doubt and terror. But he didn't try to move away. That was something. That was enough. Tansy looped the rope over his head with movements so gentle they barely disturbed the air. The weight of it settled against his neck, and for one terrible moment she thought he'd panic, thought he'd rear or bolt or do something that would send them both over the edge. But he didn't. He just stood there, trembling, trusting her enough to let this happen, even though everything in him was screaming to fight or flee. "Good," Tansy whispered. "So good. You're being so brave." She wrapped her end of the rope around her hand. Once, twice, giving herself something to hold on to, not to pull him, never to pull, just to maintain that physical connection, that reminder that neither of them was alone in this. "Now comes the hard part," she said. "We have to turn around and go back the way I came, and the ledge is narrow, so we'll have to go slow, one step at a time. Can you do that with me?" Smoky Ears didn't answer, of course, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle lowering of his head, a slight relaxation in his locked muscles. Not calm, not yet, but willing, ready to try. Tansy began the painstaking process of turning herself around on the ledge. Every movement was calculated, weight distributed carefully, feet finding purchase on stone that felt too loose, too unreliable. Behind her, Smoky Ears' breathing was ragged but steady. He was waiting, trusting her to know the way. When she finally faced back towards safety, she took a moment to steady herself. Her legs were shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. Below, she could see faces looking up. Calder, Lily, the other ranchers. All of them watching, waiting, hoping. "All right," Tansy said, as much to herself as to Smoky Ears. "Here we go." Nice and slow. She took one step backward. The rope between them remained slack. She wasn't pulling him, just moving and trusting he'd follow. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she felt the rope shift slightly as Smoky Ears moved forward, felt the warmth of his breath on the back of her neck as he closed the distance she'd created. "That's it," she breathed. Just like that, one step at a time, another step, another. The ledge seemed to go on forever, each foot of progress feeling like miles. Tansy's entire world narrowed to the rope in her hand, the stone under her feet, the sound of Smoky Ears breathing behind her. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else existed. Halfway across, the ledge crumbled. Not catastrophically, just a section about 6 inches wide giving way under Tansy's heel. Small rocks skittered down the cliff face, the sound sharp in the tense silence. Smoky Ears spooked, throwing his head up, and for one terrible moment the rope went taut as he tried to back up, tried to escape this new danger. "Easy." Tansy's voice was sharp with urgency. "Easy. Don't back up. There's nothing behind you but air." She felt him stop, felt the terrible weight of him poised on the edge of panic. This was it, the moment where trust either held or shattered, where all the patience, all the gentle work, all the promises she'd made proved either real or empty. "Listen to me," she said, forcing her voice to calm even though her heart was hammering. "I know you're scared. I know every instinct you have is telling you to run, but you can't run from this. The only way out is forward. The only way to safety is to trust me, right now, in this moment. Please." She wasn't even sure she was talking to Smoky Ears anymore. Wasn't sure if she was talking to herself, to Emma, to every frightened part of her soul that had been running for 20 years. Please, please trust. Please let this matter. Please let connection be worth the risk. The rope slackened. Smoky Ears had stopped pulling backward. "Thank you," Tansy whispered. "Thank you for trusting me." She started moving again, slower now, testing each foothold before putting weight on it. The damaged section of ledge was behind them, but the whole path felt unstable, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. And then finally, impossibly, the ledge widened. They were past the worst of it. The path ahead was still narrow but manageable, leading down to where the search party waited with ropes and blankets and medical supplies for Smokey's wound. Tansy's legs nearly gave out with relief. She leaned against the rock face, pressing her forehead to the stone, feeling tears track down her dusty face. They'd made it. They'd actually made it. Behind her, Smokey's nuzzled her, shoulder gentle, questioning. "Are we safe now? Is it over?" "Almost," she told him, reaching back to stroke his neck. "Almost there, just a little further." Tansy's voice had been unused for so long, for so many years, that speaking aloud felt strange. But standing on that widening ledge with Smokey's pressed close behind her and the town gathered below, she found herself talking. Not planning the words, not choosing them carefully, just letting them come. "I had a daughter," she said, her voice carrying down to the waiting crowd. "Her name was Emma. She died 20 years ago in a school bus accident, and I blamed myself for it. I blamed myself even though it wasn't my fault, even though nothing I could have done would have changed what happened. And I ran to the mountain because I couldn't bear to live in a world where she didn't." Smokey shifted behind her, his warmth a solid presence at her back. Below, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just listened. "I spent 20 years hiding," Tansy continued, "telling myself I was healing, but really I was just stuck, frozen in the worst moment of my life, unable to move forward, unable to let go. And I might have stayed that way forever if it hadn't been for this stubborn, scared animal who needed someone to understand what it felt like to be broken." She turned slightly so she could see Smokey's face, see the intelligence and fear and tentative hope in his eyes. "He's not tamed," she said. "He's not fixed. He's just less afraid than he was. And that's what I am too. Still grieving, still carrying scars, but less afraid, less alone. And that's enough. That has to be enough." The rope in her hand felt like more than just grass and fiber. It felt like every connection she'd refused for 20 years, every relationship she'd walked away from, every moment of trust she'd denied herself. And holding it now, feeling the weight of Smokey's on the other end, she understood something she'd been too frightened to see before. Connection wasn't weakness. It was courage. The bravest thing you could do was let someone else matter, even knowing they could leave, could hurt you, could break your heart into pieces so small you'd never find them all. "I'm sorry," she said. And she was talking to everyone and no one. To Emma, to her ex-husband, to the town that had given her space when she needed it, to herself. "I'm sorry I ran. I'm sorry I stayed gone so long. I'm sorry I let fear make me small." Below, she saw Calder step forward. "Nobody's asking for apologies, Tansy. We're just glad you're here now." The simple acceptance in his voice nearly undid her. She'd expected judgment, pity, the complicated weight of people's expectations. Instead, she got understanding. The recognition that everyone carried their own grief, their own fear, their own reasons for running or staying or making the choices they made. "Come on down," Lily called up. "Both of you, let's get that shoulder looked at." Tansy nodded, not trusting her voice anymore. She took another step forward, and another, and Smokey's followed. The path was easier now, wide enough that they could walk side by side. She looped the rope loosely around her shoulder, keeping contact but not restraint. As they descended, she kept talking not to the crowd anymore, but to Smokey's, to herself, to the mountain that had sheltered her when she needed shelter and was now releasing her back to the world. "You're going to be okay," she murmured. "We both are. It won't be easy, and there'll be days when we want to run again, when the fear gets loud and connection feels like too much work. But we'll try anyway. We'll keep trying, because that's what living means. Not being unafraid, just being brave enough to try again." The last section of path opened onto flat ground, where the search party waited. Hands reached out to steady Tansy as she stepped off the rocky trail, to guide Smokey's down safely. Someone threw a blanket over the donkey's back. Someone else had water for Tansy, cool and sweet after the climb. Calder was there, his weathered face creased with concern. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen." "Learned it from you," Tansy said, and managed a shaky smile. Lily hugged her quick and fierce, then stepped back looking embarrassed. "Sorry. I'm glad you're safe." "Me too." Ben stood at the edge of the group, his expression conflicted. Finally, he walked over to Smoke Ears and examined the shoulder wound with careful hands. "Not too bad. Clean it up. Few stitches maybe. He'll be fine." "And then?" Tansy asked. Ben looked at her for a long moment, then at his father, then at his wife, who was watching him with an expression that held both challenge and hope. "Then he stays," Ben said quietly. "On the ranch. As long as he needs. No more talk about putting him down." "Thank you," Tansy said. "Don't thank me. Thank my wife for having more courage than I do." He looked at Lily with something that might have been the beginning of respect. "Thank my father for showing me that admitting you're wrong takes more strength than pretending you're right." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away, and Ben didn't either. Whatever conversation they'd have later, whatever changes came from this moment that would be theirs to navigate. But something had shifted between them. Something had cracked open just enough to let light in. The group began the walk back down toward town, moving slowly to accommodate Smoke Ears' injury and Tansy's exhaustion. The donkey walked beside her without the rope now, choosing to stay close instead of being forced to. And Tansy, the mountain woman, the grieving mother, the wounded soul learning how to be whole again, walked down from her refuge and back into the world, ready finally to see what living looked like when you stopped running from life. Now, standing in the autumn, sunshine, watching Smoke Ears graze peacefully with his new companions, Tansy felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 decades. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. Grief didn't vanish just because you acknowledged it, but a sense of being present in her own life instead of watching it from a distance. "You coming to town?" Lily's voice called from the path. The younger woman had taken to stopping by most mornings, sometimes for conversation, sometimes just to walk together to the corral in comfortable silence. "In a bit," Tansy replied, just watching him settle in. Lily joined her at the fence, both women leaning on the rails the way ranchers had done for generations. "Hard to believe he's the same animal that terrorized this place for 3 years." "He's not the same. None of us are." Tansy glanced at Lily. "How are things with Ben?" "Better. Not perfect, but better. We're talking now, really talking, not just coordinating schedules. He's trying to listen instead of just directing." Lily smiled slightly. "Turns out when you stop accepting things as they are and start demanding they change, people actually respond. That takes courage. I learned it from you. From watching you stand on that ledge and refuse to give up." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the donkeys. Smoke Ears looked up from his grazing, saw Tansy, and ambled over to the fence. She reached out automatically to stroke his neck, feeling the warmth of him, the solid reality of connection. "I've been thinking," Lily said carefully, "about starting something. A program maybe for people who need, I don't know, space to heal, a way to work with animals that understand trauma. Like therapy? Sort of. I was thinking about how helping Smoke Ears helped you, how watching you helped me find my voice again. And I wondered if there might be other people who need that kind of healing." Tansy considered this. "You'd need land, resources, knowledge about animal behavior, and trauma." "I'd need a partner," Lily said, meeting her eyes directly. "Someone who understands what it means to be broken and to heal. Someone who's patient enough to teach others what you taught that donkey." "Lily, just think about it. No pressure. But I think we could do something meaningful together. Something that matters." Before Tansy could respond, Calder's truck pulled up. He climbed out slowly, still favoring those ribs a bit, and walked over to join them at the fence. "Ladies," he greeted them. "Beautiful morning." "It is," Tansy agreed. "Been meaning to talk to you," Calder said to Tansy. "Got a call from a rancher over in the next county. He's got a horse nobody can handle, abused, they think, before he got her. Heard about what you did with Smoke Ears and wondered if you might take a look." Tansy's first instinct was to refuse, to say she was settled now, done with challenges, content with her quiet life in the cottage. But then she thought about that horse, scared and alone, probably convinced that all humans meant harm, and she felt that familiar pull, that sense of purpose she'd been missing for 20 years. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." A young rancher approached the corral then, a woman in her mid-20s with nervous energy and hopeful eyes. "Are you Tansy Braddock, the one who gentled Smoke Ears?" "I am. I'm Hannah. I work at the Triple Creek Ranch, and I've been trying to work with a mule we got last spring, but nothing I do seems to help. He just gets more agitated. And someone said you might be willing to teach me? Not do it for me, but show me how to approach it differently." Tansy looked at Lily, who was smiling knowingly, then at Calder, who shrugged as if to say, "Word gets around." Then at Hannah, with her eager face and her request for teaching rather than rescue. "All right," Tansy said. "Come by tomorrow morning, early. Bring the mule if you can transport him safely, or I'll come to you if not. We'll see what we can figure out together." Hannah's face lit up. "Really? Thank you. Thank you so much." She hurried off, already pulling out her phone to make arrangements. Tansy watched her go, feeling something shift inside her chest, not fear this time, but anticipation. Purpose. The sense that maybe she had something to offer after all, something that mattered beyond just surviving. "Looks like you're going to be busy," Lily observed. "Looks like it. Still want to hide on your mountain?" Tansy smiled. "The mountain's not going anywhere. It'll be there when I need it. But right now I think I need this more." The morning unfolded around them. Smoke Ears returned to his grazing, content in his herd, no longer fighting against connection. Calder excused himself to handle ranch business, but not before squeezing Tansy's shoulder, a gesture of friendship, of respect, of shared understanding between two souls, learning how to forgive themselves. Lily stayed, and they talked about her program idea, what it might look like, who it might serve, how to start small and grow carefully. Tansy found herself offering suggestions, drawing on 20 years of solitary observation and the recent weeks of active engagement. Maybe Lily was right. Maybe there was something here worth building. Around noon, Tansy walked into town for supplies. Harold greeted her by name at the general store, asked how she was settling in, mentioned that his sister's grandson might benefit from some animal therapy if Tansy ever got that program running. People waved from across the street. Someone invited her to church on Sunday, not pushily, just friendly, an offer she could accept or decline without judgment. The town that had once felt like a place of painful memories now felt like possibility. Not home, not yet, but something that could become home if she let it. She stopped by Emma's grave on the way back to the cottage. She'd been avoiding it for 3 weeks. Not sure what she'd say or feel, but standing there now, looking at the headstone with its simple inscription, "Emma Rose Braddock, beloved daughter," she felt not the crushing grief of before, but something gentler. Sadness, yes. Missing, always. But also gratitude. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I let grief make me disappear. You deserved better than a mother who ran away." The wind moved through the cemetery trees, carrying autumn leaves in lazy spirals. "But I'm trying now, really trying, and I hope you'd be proud of that. Proud that I finally stopped hiding. Proud that I'm helping other scared creatures find their way back to trust." She placed her hand on the cool stone, feeling the carved letters under her palm. "I love you. I'll always love you. And I'm learning that loving you doesn't mean I have to stop living, that honoring your memory means living fully, not hiding from life because it hurts." "No," answer came, because no answer was possible. But somehow, Tansy felt lighter as she walked away, like she'd finally said something she'd needed to say for 20 years, and saying it had loosened the knot in her chest that had made breathing hard for so long. Back at the cottage, she found a package on her doorstep. No return address, but she recognized Michael's handwriting on the label. Inside was a photograph, one she'd forgotten existed. Emma at 10, standing beside Copper with one hand on the mare's neck, grinning at the camera with dirt on her face and joy in her eyes. On the back, Michael had written, "Thought you might want this. She was so happy that day. We both were. Remember us like that? P." Tansy held the photograph carefully, tracing Emma's smile with one finger. Then she carried it inside and placed it on the small mantel above the wood stove. Not hidden in a pocket anymore, not tucked away where grief could fester in private. Just there, present, a reminder of love and loss, and the complicated truth that both could exist together. She made tea and sat by the window, watching smoke ears in the distance. The donkey lifted his head as if sensing her attention, and for just a moment their eyes met across the space between them. Recognition passed between them, two wounded souls who'd learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the pain or pretending the scars didn't exist. It was about moving forward anyway, about choosing connection over isolation, about being brave enough to trust that not every hand extended meant harm. Tomorrow, Hannah would arrive with her troubled mule. Tomorrow, Tansy would begin teaching what she'd learned, not just about animals, but about patience, presence, and the slow work of rebuilding trust. Tomorrow, she'd take another step into this new life she was building. But today she just sat in the warm sunlight of her cottage, holding a cup of tea and looking at a photograph of her daughter, and let herself feel everything, the grief, the hope, the fear, the possibility, all of it together, messy and complicated and real. The mountain woman had come down from her refuge and learned something essential. You didn't have to choose between remembering the past and embracing the future. You could hold both, could honor what was lost while still reaching for what might be found. And sometimes, if you were very brave and very patient and very willing to try, you could discover that the most untamable things in life weren't wild animals or stubborn donkeys or even mountains that sheltered you from pain. They were the parts of yourself you'd locked away, the connections you'd denied, the hope you'd been too frightened to hold. But with time, with trust, with the steady work of showing up day after day and trying again, even those could be gentled. Not broken, not tamed, just welcomed back into the light where they belonged. Tansy Braddock was 62 years old, and she was finally learning how to live. And that, she thought, watching the sun paint gold across the valley she'd once run from, that was enough.